there are a lot of reasons why the VAT tax as sold to the public would not work. One, because most people don't see it as a tax, they would see it as an increased price on goods. And that would have a disparate impact on poor and middle class people. In other words, a millionaire doesn't really care if it costs $800 or $850. So what? He pays. But the guy who's working for minimum wage, or the guy who has a large family to support, or the guy who's working in a factory and doesn't have unlimited funds at his disposal, will notice that prices are higher, and it's going to hurt. The other thing that the VAT tax was supposed to do was get rid of the IRS. The problem with that, of course, is that it would never happen. Because who's going to guarantee that everybody's doing it honestly and that they're all charging the tax they should all along the line and collecting it and making sure that it gets back into the government coffers? As I tried to emphasize a little earlier, getting the money into the government coffers is a very strong impulse of government. So there would still be a whole massive collection agency. All right? And the other thing would be, of course, certain people would say, listen, I'm not adding that much value. We're exempt from the VAT tax. What can you do for me, Mr. Congressman? What can you do for me, Mr. Legislator, Mr. Senator? What can you do for me? And you would have the same sort of nonsense political cronyism that we have now with the system we have. A system that is 14,000 pages long and 9 million words, approximately. All right? To look into all of that and figure out who's getting a special break, who's getting a special knock, is almost impossible because of the language. The other tax that is being touted greatly is the flat tax. In an ideal world, it would be great. It would be a little bit of a hard sell because, hey, you know, the guy making $30,000 a year is paying X, and the guy making, you know, $3 million a year is paying X. Same percentage. Of course, X of 3 million is a lot more than X of 30,000. But people would get very, oh, hey, it's a tax break for the rich. No, it's not. Everybody would be paying the same amount of tax. That's why it's called a flat tax. There are problems with that as well. One, right now, many people in lower income levels are paying no tax at all. And if you all of a sudden turn around and hit them with a tax, you're in deep political trouble. Okay? The people who have money can deal with it. The people who don't have money or are not paying taxes now would be a major political problem. And if you're going to do something in a political manner, you have to consider the political consequences. The other problem is that the current system is so unbelievably complex and with so many various effects within the economy of the country and internationally, that just to throw it out and put in a new simplified system would probably cause more total chaos and disruptions than staying with the current system. Now, I happened to come upon an article about supply-side economics and the Laffer curve, which, if anybody remembers, the Laffer curve shows that at higher levels of taxation, you get lower levels of tax coming in. Whereas at lower levels of taxation, you get higher levels. And there's a certain point at which that breaks. We had President Ronald Reagan, who was a Laffer curve lover, as it were, who initiated a whole bunch of major tax cuts. We had a problem with those. You can almost say that the tax cuts never happened. Why? Because for every dollar of tax revenue that came in because of people's willingness to pay at a reduced rate, the Congress spent $1.65. And that's a continuing problem. The other problem we have property taxes, okay, which are huge, particularly in New York State. We have problems with funding as well, not just because of taxes, because of obligations, contractual obligations that both the states and the federal government have. So how do we reform the tax system and take care of our obligations and deal with it? Now, I'm going to make one statement that has to be kept solidly in mind. All of the tax reform in the world will accomplish nothing if we don't seriously get spending under control. If you don't control the spending, it doesn't matter because the taxes will be controlled by the spending also. The effects of the taxes are controlled by the spending. Unintentionally maybe, but that's what happens. So what do we do? Well, one, we try to fight any additional taxes. Why? We don't need them. We need cuts in spending. If we could just keep the tax system we have and bring the spending down, that would be a huge step forward. Then, once we get the income and outgo more closely balanced, we can take a look at the tax system and remove all the special goody tax exemptions for this group or the special knocks for this group, put it into a more, I'm loath to use the word egalitarian, but a more level playing field, so that if you're going into business, you can expect to get treated fairly on the tax basis as well. Because even though you know that your buddy is friends with the congressman and he's this, he's that, he's got the same tax situation that you have. That's not what we have now. It really isn't. You don't need $14,000 to write the tax code to collect taxes as we have them. Okay? I'm going to conclude with something that I just want to remind people of. The reason we have our Constitution is because under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government couldn't pay its bills. We have an obligation to pay our bills. We have an obligation to pay for necessary government services. What we do not have a moral obligation or a moral ability to do is to take from one person to give it to somebody else. The whole moral ethic of redistribution is a black hole, morally. And that's another problem that has to be dealt with. When you're talking about tax reform, what are you using the taxes for? If they are for necessary government services and goods to keep the government running, most of us don't have much of a problem with that, unless you're a real serious libertarian. Okay? But if you want to use that for redistribution of wealth, there's no moral defense for that. The only reason the government can do it is because it has government power. And that's part of what we have to stop. But in order to do that, first of all, we have to get the spending under control, because otherwise they will always have a rationale for more taxes. We go for the spending first, and then for the taxes, and get our system back to where it makes sense, where our economy can grow, and we can still continue to be the envy of every nation in the world.